Welcome to Dialogues at Fulcrum, where we have conversations with experts and analysts on the latest geopolitical, economic, and cultural developments in Southeast Asia.
Hello, and welcome to this Dialogues at Fulcrum podcast. Fulcrum is the opinion and commentary forum of the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute. I am Lee Ho An, a senior fellow at ICS, co-coordinator of the Malaysia Studies program, and one of the Fulcrum editors. Today, we are honored to have Yang Berhormat, YB, Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad. Nik Nazmi is Malaysia's Minister of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability and RES. After the unity government was formed in December 2022, he was appointed Minister of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. 1 year later, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim reshuffled his cabinet and reconfigured some portfolios. So for the past 15 months, Nik Nazmi has focused on natural resources and sustainability. His portfolio deals with the profound challenge of our time. The subject can be overwhelming, but Nik Nazmi has recently published a book that helps spur the conversation. The book is entitled Saving the Planet, Climate and Environmental Lessons from Malaysia and Beyond. He's a prolific writer since his student days and throughout his political career. His previous book, a memoir entitled Malaysian Sun, A Progressive's Political Journey in the Heart of Southeast Asia, was published in 2022. Nik Nazmi, congratulations on the book. And it is still Shawwal, so as I prefer to say, Selamat Bulan Raya. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Yeah. So glad that you can join us, and we will base our conversation on your book, Saving the Planet, and branch out here and there. But let me set the stage a bit. I want to commend you for writing this informative, thoughtful, and engaging book. It's not just a compilation of speeches or articles, but a range of freshly written chapters that are expansive yet cohesive. It covers water, forests, climate justice, and more. And the pages are filled with data, real-world scenarios, and policy insight flavored by your personal experience and observation and interspersed with lively anecdotes. So I enjoyed reading it, and I recommend it to all listeners. And the preface, you said, it is important to write something on the environment and climate change to share what I have learned in the form of my thoughts and experiences at both the Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability. There's an urgency and a personal resonance with the message. I'm not sure you would have written a book on tourism or higher education 2 years after you were appointed Minister of Tourism or Higher Education, if that happened to be the case. So why write this book? And could you briefly share why now while in office?
Yeah, I mean, we can only speculate if I was in a different portfolio. But what I can say is while I was following certain parts of sustainability, climate change, but when I came into this portfolio, it was pretty much still rather new for me. I was in the deep end of the pool. I had to learn on the job, do a lot of reading, talk to experts, to people who have a lot of experience, to activists. And it was really fascinating. I mean, I think that was what I found. And I felt that, then I thought to myself, and as you rightly said, I like to write. So I thought that, I might as well compile all this in the form of a book. And I have to say that this is probably the most difficult one because it's not, normally I write about politics, about things which are rather more familiar for me. So for this, it was a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. And how do I translate that to something that is easily understood? That's the other challenge. So yeah, I really enjoyed writing the book, and I hope that people find that it's a useful reading material to just understand where we are and what Malaysia's view is with regards to the planet.
Right. Could you tell us about the process that gave rise to the book? How did you formulate the chapters, conduct the research, collate materials, and how did you find time to write amidst your busy schedule?
I think we travel quite a bit, right? So the traveling in the flights and all that, so it's either watching a movie or doing this. So I could sneak in some time. But I think the process was that, I just had a basic framework in mind about what the chapters would be. And then from that, I just did a lot of reading. And, So I also try to, as mentioned, I did not want to make it highbrow. And I know, I mean, I don't pretend to be a scientific expert. So the idea is, how do I make it easily understood? I even bring in the analogy of football or music or things that I think which I would relate to being a lay person and other than my own personal experiences. But also the other part which I found interesting is there's a lot of Malaysian culture, whether you look, among the Malays, among the Ibans, the Dusuns, the Orang Asli, obviously that we can talk about how we've been living in harmony with nature. Similarly, you talk about faith. There's a lot of aspects about that as well, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, so on and so forth. So I found that pretty interesting. That we don't talk enough about, how actually it's not Western or modern, but actually it's there all along.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. The process that went through this, tall order, writing a book that is spanning so many issues and a very complex challenge. I think we can return back to what you were talking about right at the very end, maybe a bit of a clarion call for the region. We talk about, the commonalities in Southeast Asia, but this challenge, just to drill a bit deeper on, environmental sustainability, there's natural resource management, climate change, right? These challenges are complex and they're interdependent. It requires coordination across ministries and between federal and state governments. Now, you critique Malaysia's past fragmented approach and how, quote, it will not do as the country embarks on its ambitious and necessary journey towards net zero and protecting the health, livelihood, and future of its citizens. That the configuration of Malaysia's cabinet portfolios, especially the ones you have held, could be reflective of a shift from a fragmented approach to a more integrated one. That is a change at the most macro level. It would be helpful for us to know what are some specific lessons you have learned on implementing an integrated approach, or in today's jargon, the all of government, all of society approach.
The belief, the faith in all this, in the goals, it has to come from the very top. Because if it's not there, then we are not able to bring the other ministries together. And that's one important part. So I think that's where the leadership of the Prime Minister has been very helpful in trying to do all this. Two, and this is the tricky part, is that one is of course within the different among the different ministries, but two is when you talk about the different state governments, and Malaysia is a federation, but I think even more so today with the political realities. We're not just talking about Borneo, which is not much more now, talking more about their autonomy and Malaysia Agreement 63, but also in the peninsula, where because of the current political scenario, states have more power and are more vocal. So that means, this is democracy at work, right? And I think when people like to compare us with how Malaysia managed to nationalize oil and gas in 1974, I always like to repeat that in 2020, well, now it's 2025, it's very different than 1974. You have different parties, different coalitions, and state governments are much more assertive. So that involves a lot of work, and you need a lot of convincing. And just as when you look at how Malaysia would like to be the voice of the developing world when it comes to planetary issues, but at the same time you have the poorer states who tend to have more forest cover, who are also demanding to be compensated more for conservation, because they say that the states that have developed, they have already cleared a lot of the forests. So that sort of balance, and it can't just be a stick approach. It has to be a carrot and stick. So now, since 2019, we've had ecological fiscal transfers, where federal government is giving money to states to conserve. And we are even now looking at transferring money direct into the consolidated account of the state governments. Obviously, it's not enough. We are looking at carbon projects and whatnot. But I think it's much more nuanced in the current day and age. But overall, I think communicating that where the direction that the government is going, the federal government is going, that helps. Even for businesses. I mean, they will complain, when we revise our tariffs, we retarget subsidies so there's no more blanket subsidies. Obviously, they will complain, but at the end of the day, if they understand where the government is going, then I think that is what they crave the most, i.e., to get the sense of direction. So they know, when they want to invest and make preparations for the situation. So I think that is something that we need to work on when we try to bring everyone to be on the same page.
Yeah, we are talking about like what we often say as a existential crisis, right? Of the present age, this era that we're living in. But there are also other aspects of the mission to save the planet, right, that are inherited, the structures and habits and mindsets of the past. This is being a little bit more retrospective. Now, in this book, you do grapple with the complicated legacies and the baggage to some extent. And in Malaysia's case, there's private car-centric way of life, energy and fuel subsidies, as you just talked about, heavy deforestation, and ambivalence, if not resistance, towards sustainability as a hindrance to development or a Western imposition. You touch on how Mahathir, as Prime Minister in the 1980s, was dismissive towards environmental activists and labeled them, quote, crypto socialists at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. And he lambasted the eco-imperialism of the West. That's also quoting him. Now, it was though to say, you cut down your forests, say to the West, right? You cut down your forests, don't you dare lecture us about cutting down our forests. He was also saying that the West should bear more cost for the world's sustainability efforts, right? But for all the posturing, Malaysia ended up replicating the same capitalist extractive model. Right? We did not really pursue an alternative, or that would be an argument, right? And say to the West, you develop by spoiling your environment. We will develop without spoiling our environment. You didn't really delve very deeply into these questions. I feel your tone is a bit restrained on retrospective matters. So, could you share with us, what your thoughts are? Whether Malaysia could be a bit more critical, looking back, do a bit more critical self-examination, and also owning up to mistakes of the past.
When you talk about Dr. Mahathir, I think a lot. There's some truth to what he says. There's some justification when he was criticizing the West for hectoring and lecturing the developing world. But on the other hand, as you also rightly pointed out, the model that he pursued is basically pretty much the same developmental model that he criticized, ironically. And I think, as far as, I'm concerned, because it was hand in hand. When you look at in Malaysia, a lot of this emergence of nature-based NGOs, it came out in the 70s. And then they faced a lot of problems in the 80s when democracy was a bit more constrained in the country. But then when I came in 2008, when we had that huge wave, that tsunami on 8th of March 2008, it also brought in a few environmental activists into government, right? So I think the relationship has somewhat changed. Malaysia's developmental model, it's still pretty much previously, is on that same framework, I would have to say. But I think that today, we realize that that's not the way forward anymore. It may have its justification at that point of time to a certain extent, right? But certainly we can't pursue that same model anymore in 2025. And I think that's why, the Prime Minister is talking about the Madani economic framework, about sustainability being at the center of it, about a more humane approach to things. So I think in terms of that, we certainly realize that path of purely GDP growth, of being a low cost, low value, low wage economy, that can't be our model of development anymore. And I reflect on that, and I said that most countries in the East, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, started like that. China, but they moved up the value chain. But Malaysia, by having blanket subsidies and being very liberal with our immigration policy, we were able to compete on the same old framework. But we can't go on like that. And we are on the verge of getting out from the middle income trap. And we need a different approach to do so. So I think we have started that new approach, and hopefully we'll see it bearing fruit in the next few years.
I'm glad you brought up, the longer journey, right? From 2008, there was a breakthrough when the Barisan Nasional's two-thirds majority was broken for the first time. You were elected into the Selangor state government as the youngest, I think, elected representative in the whole country at that time. And there were various activists who were either entered politics or they were appointed, right, into councils and so on. It just brings up, this thought in my mind now about the process that there's been this bottom up, and people who were from the activist and social side entering into politics. But one part of that experience, I think, often is that you end up having to deal with realities and making compromises. Is there anything that has stood out for you in your experience in terms of you stand out on principle for something? One thing comes to mind is Linus, for instance, that they're very fiercely against it, but then in government, not so easy to just dismantle it, right? So for you, is there something that you have experienced where something you really championed, but then you found that there were constraints, and the need to make some compromises?
Well, I mean, when you get elected at 26 and you reflect back, obviously there are things that your worldview changes over the years. But I would like to think that the basic sense of idealism that brought me into politics in the first place has not changed. If you want to, looking at specific issues, to be honest, I mean, yes, I mean, I knew that, Linus was a major issue for Pakatan Harapan, or even from Pakatan Rakyat days. It became a major issue. It was, even combined with the Bersih movement and whatnot. But personally, I wasn't really, at the center of it. It was a lot of my friends from Pahang, I think, were really focused on it. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, we have to deal with reality. And with regards to Malaysia had this long history with rare earth in the past, which was not pleasant in Perak, right? So that was a major concern, rightfully so. But to be fair, I mean, like Linus, the government has come up with more conditions and looking at the evidence and all that. And also the fact remains that for a lot of green practices, for EVs, for wind turbines, we need rare earth. So how do we go about it, right? Yes, it has to be safe. I think issue of safety of radioactivity and all that has to be addressed. Two, a lot of it in Malaysia is also under forest reserves. So that is why we are now studying. We did not immediately give the green light, but we actually have a proper study because looking at methods that will not actually be negative to the environment in the as we compare everything. So I think we are going about it very carefully, and because we want to leverage on that. And the thing of Malaysia is also we are fortunate in a way because we have Linus, which is the biggest processing plant outside China, and is an Australian company. But at the same time, our pilot mine is operated with a Chinese partner. So this is something where it's a geopolitical, a matter of geopolitical rivalry today. And I think Malaysia has to benefit from it. And at the same time, ensure that it is done at the highest standards possible.
So you are touching on a bit of politics, and I think that's a nice segue. This is the midpoint, more or less exactly 2.5 years into, if it is a full 5-year term of the Anwar Ibrahim administration and the Madani economic framework, right, which has articulated sustainability as a key pillar, while energy transition, climate resilience, and universal supply of electricity and water are focus areas. What, in your view, must be achieved by the next general election, which must happen by end 2027? Or some speculate might happen next year, but what do you think is the thing that, you would like to really see happen before the election?
We have announced previously, the retargeting of subsidies, and this actually matters in terms of sustainability because it will push households, it will push companies to adopt more sustainable measures, right? Because if electricity is so cheap, everyone will just get it from the grid, and it's mostly coal and natural gas. If petrol is universally subsidized, everyone will be using internal combustion cars. So what we've seen is that when we started with electricity, we've increased the tariff for water. We've seen that, solar, for example, becomes more attractive. People are looking to a certain extent things like rainwater harvesting in Malaysia. And I think obviously we've done it with diesel, but petrol is obviously the I think among the most challenging part, right? And we have to be careful. I mean, I totally understand. We've seen even in elections in the most developed democracies where governments that do not address well, when you think that you're so gung ho on doing climate measures or sustainability measures, and people are given the impression that that pushes up the price of fuel, the price of food, cost of living, it makes people lose jobs, then it does come and bite you in election time. So I think that is the worry. And I know that a lot of my colleagues in cabinet are concerned about that, and understandably so. But I think credit to the PM and to the government so far that we've started on those measures. This year is obviously a very tough economic year for the world. So I think if we can do that, but at the same time, because so far what we've done, we've seen that the impact on inflation has been rather moderate, right? But petrol again is a different kettle of fish. So I think we need to go through that properly. The communications, the narrative must truly be out there, because the idea is just like when we address electricity, is that we are still basically one way or another we are subsidizing 85% of the household. That means the working class, people in the kampong, but also the middle class, right? So I think that narrative has to be out there. It has to be done gradually in a sense. You can't have a big bang approach, austerity measure. That will not do, because I think that will cause the downfall of a government. So I think that I mean, looking at something that is in a way related to me, I think we have to continue this move, but we have to be able to tell the story. And the government has done certain other things like pushing up the minimum wage, progressive wage mechanism, although limited, but it has started to introduce. We've started to introduce that even for the civil servants. We've increased the wages. I think that as a way to cushion some of the impacts of all this retargeting of subsidies.
Yeah, speaking of, in the global context as well, we are very mindful of, right, Canada's repeal of the carbon tax. Is that something that has weighed on the government? Is it something you all have talked about?
No, not yet. I mean, as mentioned, I think we are obviously also looking closely at Singapore, because how they've introduced carbon tax, I think, in a more gradual manner. I think for Malaysia, so far in budget 2025, the PM announced that we will focus on iron, steel, and energy. And I think maybe even then we will not start with all three, right? So that is being worked out. My ministry will come up with a technical input. Obviously, the lead ministry is the Ministry of Finance. But yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that we have to bear in mind. And I think we also, it's the same lesson with regards to GST, the goods and services tax, where in Malaysia, I think we started at slightly a high level as opposed to how Singapore did it. So I think when it comes to carbon tax, maybe it's better to err on the side of caution, go on the lower side first and see the impact, and later revise that. I think if we do not make the economic case for it, we've seen even in the UK under a Labour government, there are some concerns that if Ed Miliband goes too far and all that. So we have to be very smart about it. At the end of the day, I'm still a politician, and I think I understand, but I think that we also have to have the courage to make the case for it rather than not doing anything.
Yeah, just pivoting slightly, or still a bit more international context. We're having this conversation in the shadow of the Trump tariffs, but there is move that was replicated from Trump 1 and Trump 2.0 that is very directly related, right, to your portfolio, which is the US stepping back from withdrawing from global climate action, stepping back from the Paris Climate Accord commitments. So how is Malaysia responding to that, right? And plans to fill the leadership void and participate in its capacity? And will Malaysia leverage on ties with the Global South? And I have in mind the prospective membership of BRICS. What are some things that we can expect in the coming year or two?
Well, US is definitely a major economy. It has a major footprint. But at the same time, we are aware, the moment that we know that Donald Trump is president again, so I think the world was braced for this. We've seen it in the past, not just with regards to the Paris Agreement, but even with the Kyoto Protocol, right? So nothing new there in that sense. So that is something out of our control. But I think we also have to look at the other parts of the planet. I mean, we see Europe, obviously, I think has been an important player in this. Also, China, a lot of the latest technologies, China has been able to drive down the price of EVs. They have the leading technology on rare earths and many other things, right? But similarly, I mean, even Japan, Korea, Australia are all major countries. So if you ask, and BRICS too, I mean, as far as Brazil is concerned, they are also a country with a lot of biodiversity, a very vocal country with regards to the international world, similar to Malaysia. So for us, I think it's important to strengthen the multilateral process because we know that flawed as it may be, that is the only way that we have to build a more climate resilient planet together. We can only do with what it's under our control. And I'm still hopeful. In the US, it's a powerful federation. The states, the cities, they have their own policies, their own goals. And we would love to continue to pen notes with them as well. We will continue to go on. The world moves on.
I think the world could also do with a dose of that cautious optimism that you are exuding, and an informed optimism as well. I think we want to focus on something that is very much Southeast Asian, literally, right, demarcated as a Southeast Asia and ASEAN matter, the power grid. And of course, it also because, your book touches on it. It is one of Malaysia's it's part of Malaysia's sustainability strategy. And I think there's a relevance with Malaysia chairing ASEAN in 2025. What steps will Malaysia take for advancing the ASEAN power grid, especially this year as a chair, and as both as Malaysia's funding source and as a more efficient way to manage renewable energy distribution?
Just for context, this idea of linking all our power grids, our electricity grids across Southeast Asia together across the countries has been mentioned for decades. The only difference is that now people are talking a lot more on sustainability. Two is that because of the price of energy has gone up, so it makes this project actually viable, right? So Malaysia has one such project, which is to the Bakun Dam. The idea from the 80s, 90s was to transport this across the South China Sea to a peninsula from Sarawak. But it was never viable. But today, Singapore, for example, is talking about getting its source of energy from Peninsular Malaysia, from Sarawak, from Indochina, even from Australia, right? So that shows to you that it's finally viable as a concept. So I think, we have some, projects. For example, there's been some small exchanges and between Malaysia and Singapore, Peninsular Malaysia and Singapore, between Peninsula and Thailand, even from Laos all the way to Singapore via Thailand and Malaysia. But it's still a bit too small, not yet the scale that we were talking about when we mentioned the ASEAN power grid. For example, the idea is, we should get energy from Sumatra to Peninsular Malaysia, or from the islands of Indonesia to Singapore, and not just, again, going back Sarawak to Peninsula as well as to Singapore. So all this is being discussed, and I think that we've seen progress. One of the things we managed to do when I was in charge of electricity was we allowed the export of green energy. Because I know, like, for example, Singapore, there's a huge deficit of green energy because of the nature of the island. And Malaysia has a lot of space. And we think that it's actually in our benefit to be able to sell it at a premium to the Singaporean market. So this has been allowed. We have this energy exchange. So I think that we will see a lot more progress this year. So this will be under our Energy Transition Ministry, which is now under our Deputy Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Fadilah. So from what I know, it is making a lot of good progress, and we hope that we will be able to see a lot more deals signed and all that. Because the other part is including, how we're looking at in the equator, you don't get a lot of wind energy, but in Indochina, it's actually viable to get wind energy. So that's another thing that ASEAN Power Grid will actually help to distribute all this electricity to the region.
Thank you very much. Well, we will draw to a close now. I think no better way than to talk about the theme of communication. You have written a book that is communicating ideas and trying to reach a wider audience. And I think on this topic, it's really imperative, right, to craft a clear message, to impress the urgency of action to save the planet, but without descending into despair. And also, as you put it, without talking down to people. You advocate reason and persuasion, and you touch on how all religions, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, right, value environmental stewardship. And this can be a point of connection in Malaysia and the region. But this is also an endeavor that requires sacrifice and without immediate tangible benefits. So, how do we get this message across? And is there a specific angle for Southeast Asia to really embrace sustainability and climate action?
It's very crucial. I mean, if I'm talking to activists, I would say, yeah, don't be condescending. Don't take the moral high ground, because sometimes some people may find that's a bit off-putting. Instead, we with humility we should reach out to people. Everyone is affected one way or another from climate change. And how do you find references that are accessible? Don't just talk about the science, IPCC, UNFCCC. I find all this alphabet soup tough when I became a minister. So how do you, I mean, it's fine if you're at a COP meeting, but if you're at, talking to your neighbors, you're going to your church or mosque or whatever, find a way to be able to communicate easily. That is the most crucial part. And, we appeal to the sense of being able to pass a better planet to our children. I think that is something that everyone would want the future generation to be able to enjoy what we take for granted.
And that would be the perfect note to end on. So YB, Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad, thank you so much for joining us to share your thoughts. And congratulations again on the book. The title is Saving the Planet, Climate and Environmental Lessons from Malaysia and Beyond. Again, I recommend that to everyone. Nik Nazmi, you are holding a portfolio that is so challenging yet so essential, and on issues that intensively demand cooperation within the country and between countries. So we wish you the best. We wish you energy and inspiration to be effective in this role. So thank you again for joining us, for your time and your insight.
Thank you, Hoat.
Thank you for joining us in our conversation on Dialogues at Fulcrum. If you want to access more of our analysis on Southeast Asia, please check out fulcrum.sg. Dialogues at Fulcrum is brought to you by the ISIS Yusof Ishak Institute. We look forward to sharing more insightful conversations with you in subsequent episodes. See you then!